Melissa is just off camera here. And this is a story I started to tell you, I think, a few different times. When we were on the bus or getting on and off an airplane and something interrupted it or the topic of conversation changed. But this is a story of how I first got the idea for AR&IO, even for that specific name, Active Research and Informed Opinion. And it relates to some kind of parallel issues and themes in my life that are ongoing now and that were ongoing 10 years ago and more. So I had a period of my life that culminated at Cambridge and Oxford in England. And for those of you who don't know, Cambridge and Oxford, although they look far apart on a map relative to the size of England, which is just not that big a country, there was a direct bus going from Cambridge to Oxford. And it had a catchy name, like the GX7. It was this special express bus from Cambridge to Oxford that really made it very quick to get back and forth between two places. And my ex-wife and I, partly because we were cognizant of this bus, we actually moved to a town that actually made it even quicker and easier to get between the two. So earlier we were living in downtown Cambridge itself. Then we moved to this place called St. Neots that was on the bus line, and you could really quickly get to Cambridge or Oxford. So I had a period of time, and I gave some lectures and was talking to people and hobnobbing with people and talking to people who were doing applications for getting in and doing a PhD in Buddhist studies, right? So I don't even want to bother estimating the year. Obviously, this is before my daughter was born. This is before a lot of things happened. But I already had years of experience in the field as a scholar of Buddhism. I already had articles and publications, and I'd just given these lectures. And, the lecture I gave at Oxford especially, the professor, he'd been hosting a series of lectures, and this stuff you can verify on the internet, and he really said, wow, that was better than these other people with PhDs giving lectures. He praised it in very high terms. He said that there was more content in that one lecture than they have in one of their normal semester-long courses and stuff like that, And it's true. I mean, in some ways I was there, and it was look, I'm just back from Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Yunnan. I have so much to say. I've done so much research in terms of the dry books and textual study, so much in terms of life experience, so much in terms of humanitarian work and politics. But also, both lived experience, direct cultural experience, and book reading. To give an example, this is just the kind of thing that normally isn't there in academia. I talked about at one point in the lecture, this wasn't written in the text. I put up a map, and I talked about the fact that most people misinterpret the map because they hadn't walked in real life, in person, on the banks of the Mekong River at both high tide and low tide, and know that the map changes. That historically, to understand the trade routes, you had to know that when the water was low, it wasn't things like. So there was a kind of, there was really a lot for me to share. Obviously on things like straight philosophy of mind, ethics, Buddhist philosophy per se, but also on things like the history of slavery and trade, the history of civilizations in Southeast Asia and politics. I had so much to put on the table, and kind of everyone around me in that environment was picking up on it and was kind of excited to meet me. People in anthropology, people in Asian studies, people in Buddhist studies, whatever. But of course, it became obvious. It was obvious to me even before I got there that I would never get into a master's degree or PhD program, or both as a package. It's normally what you're looking for, is where they say, look, get the MA, then get the PhD. Here's how it's going to work. I would never get into that kind of path or package academically unless someone wanted to bend the rules for me. And what I found there, and the reason for that is my first university degree is in political science. So you normally can't get into a degree in Buddhism or Asian studies unless they say, okay, you'll do this transitional program. Now, on the other hand, that happens all the time. So even my ex-wife, she got one of those transitional deals. I think her first degree was in literature. And they said, okay, you're going to make the transition from literature to anthropology by taking some courses. We're going to set you up. We're going to do the X, Y, and Z. So that is an exception to the rules, but it is a commonly made exception to the rules. And I was looking for someone to recognize the work I'd done formally and informally. Say, okay, now before I even got there, I realized how unlikely that was going to be. And then I spent some time there, and I realized that even without people bending the rules, like if you took the narrow path of applying on paper, that even that was going to be impossible for me. I've never seen that before. Okay, I guess I'm lying. I guess I have seen that before. But it's really sickening when in academia the level of prejudice and hostility is so high that you cannot even get the application. Like, you can't get the physical paper to fill out to apply for a program. They won't let you have it, right? Like, there's this level of like secrecy and skullduggery where they're basically sabotaging your ability to even be a candidate, right? That's very different from rejecting you later on. Like, okay, you applied, we evaluated you, and guess what? Only 10 people win, and you weren't one of the 10. But of course, one of the reasons they're doing that is that they're afraid. They might only have 8 applicants. So you might be one of the best 10, no matter what, even if they don't want you. Where they know that if you're allowed to apply fair and square, you have a chance, or maybe you're even likely to win. So they're undermining, they're cheating their own systems. And like, I had this kind of experience where I couldn't even get the applications. And I remember talking about that with people, and you got this whole range of kind of denialistic reactions. Most of the people inside the system wanted to believe in the system. Once in a while, you got someone who was truly, genuinely cynical, but there was a lot of phony cynicism. I remember one guy getting very angry at me and saying to me, "No, like, you must be hallucinating and paranoid. Like, this is not possible. Like, the whole system is based on real merit," and so on. And I just said to him, I said, wait, let's talk about your case. What happened to you? How did you get in here? And we went through it step by step. And yeah, people opened doors for him, and people made exceptions, and people made accommodations. And people said, hey, I'm going to fill out this form for you and get you money, get you backing from actually a bank in his case. We're going to get you a bursary. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And I said, and in my case, I literally can't get in the door. I can't get the meeting. I can't get the application. So both were true. I mean, I've already mentioned there was a lot of positive response to me. I made a big impression on people. I was very warmly received in a lot of different forms, including stuff like anthropology, which is not technically my field, but I have a lot to say about anthropology, especially in the area I've been doing research. I knew a lot about those tribal peoples and their histories and cultures. There was a lot of positivity coming back, a lot of positive recognition. But then on the other hand, formally and informally, a lot of people were telling me, it's hopeless, don't even apply, don't even waste your time, don't think about it. Both Cambridge and Oxford. And I talked to other people too, like University of London, which has SOAS, and, different answers in different cases. But this is again. So at that time, the next step in the thought process is, look, what is it I would want to do if I got in? What is the project I would want to do if I actually got an MA or PhD? And the reality is, I can probably do that now without getting an MA or PhD. And the reality probably is getting the MA or PhD would only help to some extent towards that goal, towards getting that. So I wrote up a proposal for a publication, a magazine, I guess. And it was a publication that one man could do alone. So this, I don't know if this is before YouTube existed, or if it was just before I was aware of YouTube myself, or before YouTube had expanded to become this massive. I didn't think about YouTube. YouTube didn't exist for me subjectively at this time. I remember first becoming aware of YouTube when I was living in Cambodia the last time. It must have already existed, just wasn't part of my life in any way. Partly because I was living in parts of the world where the internet was very slow. You could do email, but to load a video or something, was something I didn't try to do in general. So, the idea was to do a publication that in some ways provided in the 21st century what the 19th century had and the 20th century was lacking. In Buddhist studies and Asian studies, there were a bunch of really brilliant and original publications that normally were the product of one hardworking man. There was one I remember where the editor was actually a British soldier deployed in the barracks of India. So he was part of the British military occupation of India. And there was no internet, but just through the British Postal Service, he was sending out wire transfers and letters and stuff, and people were sending things into him. And he was putting together and collating and publishing like the news for what were then new discoveries in archaeology, anthropology, study of Buddhism, history, things being translated from Sanskrit and English for the first time. And this is all being done on paper, obviously at great expense. And this guy had no academic library or institution behind him. So I was aware of examples like this back when the work was a lot harder to do, and in some ways was less rewarded and less rewarding because you could reach only a very small audience. I'd spent a lot of time in archives looking at these kinds of things, and I'd seen the substance that the progress of Buddhist studies and Asian studies was made of back in the 19th century. Small numbers of extraordinary people like this. And by the way, the process not being peer-reviewed. So you'd get, brilliant and sometimes flawed letters coming from people. Like, I remember one that was a letter from a soldier who had himself participated in piling up and burning Buddhist manuscripts. So he'd been involved in looting, burning, and destroying Buddhist manuscripts on behalf of the British Empire, and writing in, describing that and what was going on in Buddhism and stuff. It's not peer-reviewed, right? It's also not journalism. But like now you look at it, whatever, you look at it 100 years later, you go, wow, it's so valuable that someone got that telegram or got that wire or that letter and took it and put it into this, somewhat scholarly magazine. And then the other thing that I saw in those magazines in the 19th century, again, without peer review, was really just making a survey of what the new publications were. Like, oh, a new book came out of this, new book came out of that. So I put together this PowerPoint presentation saying, look, this is what I do, this is what I want to do. And it doesn't take zero funding, but it would take very, very little money. And I pointed out you can put together a list of what are the new publications. What are the new publications on Myanmar? New publications on Thailand, new publications on Burma. You can be looking at what's happening in these places around the world every month or every 3 months. You can be looking at what is the new scholarship about Asia being published in Russia. Right? English isn't the only language of scholarship. Russian, German, Italian. There are a few others to check, not that much. You can be doing a survey, even if you're just one man working alone, that's really providing something valuable for all the people concerned. And there's an interesting kind of second punch. There's a 1-2 punch here. So that's kind of the positive proposal is, look, this is something wonderful we can do. Oh, right, and there were other specifics to it. Like I pointed out, hey, there are academic conferences happening around the world. Some on Buddhism, some on Asian studies, some on politics. It'd be something like the 12th annual conference of Thai studies happens in Thailand. And most people never even found out what they missed. Like even just to have someone write up a brief summary of this guy presented this paper on this topic, here's what happened. If you just did news reporting on some of the academic events, it normally is possible to get the whole essay, whether or not we would publish the whole essay, to have a brief summary of the most interesting things going on. Because if you don't have somebody doing that, then people put in all this effort to present a conference paper. Like 5 people see it, 5 to 15 people see it, and then it disappears. And like one guy like me, I was the one guy going and spending the time in the archives and finding those things and going, wow, oh wow, I found this obscure paper by Volker Grabowski dealing with this issue in linguistics that has connections to history and politics and matters. And I knew I was like I was a tiny, tiny fraction of the people who would care about that and who should know about that, finding out about that paper and understanding its implications. So I saw a big positive opportunity there. That's one punch. The other punch, oh God, no, I'm losing my train of thought. The other punch was the negative side of it. The other punch was pointing out, oh God, sorry, I've a rare case of this. I've really lost my train of thought. The other punch was pointing out something really negative about this situation. Maybe it'll come to me a bit later. Right, that's it. So I did a search. This is also part of the transformation of the world by Google. Google made it possible to do a keyword search through a big body of literature pretty easily. Google Scholar and what have you. I was able to use Google to search like all the Asian studies academic publications and all the Buddhist studies academic publications. And you'd search for like a word that's the equivalent in Buddhism to the Pope, right? The leader of the Buddhist church in Thailand has a particular title or a particular name. And you'd look for other words like slavery, and you'd be able to show, look, all this paper is being published, but the level of mutual ignorance between Buddhism and politics, Asian studies and politics, or academia and political reality. I point out, do you think we could do a similar search of Catholic publications and have no mention of the Pope? Like his name doesn't even appear once in a 10 or 15 year period. Do you think we could have, any Christian or Muslim literature where slavery just doesn't appear? There's just no discussion. And, there were a couple other keywords like this. So there was a 1-2 punch there where the second punch was, hey, and the other thing is what you guys are sleeping on, what everyone is participating in a kind of conspiracy in Buddhism and Asian studies, what have you, is burying and avoiding, political reality. So that was that proposal at that time. And what's been going on in the last 5 years of my life is kind of parallel, but post-Buddhist. Melissa, you've heard me asking this question a lot lately, where I ask in an open way, okay, it seems to be impossible for me to get a master's degree and PhD, and not because I have low grades, because of what's wrong with Canadian academia. There's really no program for me to even apply for. There's a lot wrong with the system and the classes and whatever. I have high grades. I have a new degree from University of Victoria in Asian Studies. I should be able to progress to an MA and PhD in Asian Studies, but I can't, so I won't. So then the next step is to ask, what is it I would do after having an MA or PhD if I could do anything? And then what's really stopping me? Could I do that now anyway without getting the MA or PhD? Or to how much does it really help me to have the MA and PhD to do that? And the truth is, probably the best thing I could do after getting an MA or PhD would be to come on YouTube and do something like AR&IO, to do this kind of survey of what's going on in politics, not just in Asia. For me, it'd be Asia, Europe, North America, and the links between them. And Asia, by the way, includes India, includes Cambodia, not just China and Japan, but to try to take on as much of Asia as I can. And obviously the Muslim world in the core of Asia, a huge amount of work just to cover what's happening in Iran and Iraq. That's going to be the real challenge for me, is budgeting my time so I can cover as much of Asia as possible, as well as Europe and North America. And like the original idea with doing this in Buddhist studies and Asian studies, the main benefit is also how it's going to transform me over time. I really don't like what would happen to me in most academic programs. When you think about what I'm going to have to learn and what I'm going to have to do with my time for 6 years maybe, getting an MA and a PhD, what it is I'm going to be studying, what it is I'm going to be forgetting, what it is I'm going to be doing and not doing with my brain, it's actually a pretty dark path for me to get on. To say it's a waste of my time is an understatement. It could really have a lot of negative impacts in my life. Whereas doing this kind of systematic survey and analysis, not just knee-jerk commentary, but really meaningful analysis of what's going on in politics and history as it unfolds, that to me is something that I think is going to transform me in a really positive way. So the name Active Research and Informed Opinion has really been with me from the time I gave up on Buddhism as a religion. It was over 5 years ago. Because I remember that time thinking, okay, so now that Buddhism doesn't have the role in my life that it used to have, what would that publication be? What would it be that I would want to do, with or without a PhD in education? What is it really that, I'd want to sink my own resources of time into and so on? And at that time, I really thought, okay, you know what it is? The real core of this is about active research and informed opinion. And then at that time, the problem was I was still thinking about a magazine. I was still thinking about paper, and that's hard to do alone. And definitely the strength of YouTube. If it's my full-time job, if I really give it my all, I do think that concept and what I want to do, I can adapt that to cinema here. And I can do that as pretty much a daily upload schedule. But more importantly, they're daily uploads based on reading, research, reporting you what I'm learning from academic and non-academic sources on an ongoing basis, where I'm not, this is what I hate about most YouTube channels, I'm not just repeating kind of hackneyed talking points that haven't changed since I was a university student myself. So many of these guys, Cenk Uygur and Jimmy Dore, it really is a broken record. It's the same sense of smug superiority again and again and again. They're just taking bits and pieces of things from the news and never challenging themselves and never learning new things. They're just reinforcing their sense of smug superiority, whether it's over Donald Trump or whoever's the butt of their joke for this week. I do think the other thing that really makes this important, it's not about talking ultimately, it's about learning for me, is the potential that I'm going to be pushing myself not just to make better use of the background I have in research and political analysis, but to be really extending the frontiers of what's known into what's unknown as history unfolds, and also as new and important research publications come out about political history from the past.